The Electoral Commission must identify the person who is to be shown as a president because a fake one might come. If it reads Certificate of Results of Presidential Election, the Electoral Commission of Kenya certifies that the candidate who has been duly elected the President of the Republic of Kenya under the provisions of Section 5 of the Constitution in the presidential elections held on 27th December 2007 is Honorable Mwai Kibaki.
Mimi Mwai Kibaki naapa kwamba nitatenda kazi zangu za urais kwa Jamhuri ya Kenya.
Tumekasirika vibaya sana. Hatuwezi ibiwa kama tunaona na macho. Na tunataka haki yetu, lazima tupewe.
Bwana yangu amekuwa amepeleka hapo hivyo kwa mtu hapo ng'ambo wanamtatakatia hapo.
Wanatuchomea hata manyumba, wanatukatakata. Hatuna uzuri, hatuna amani. Tumekosa amani kabisa.
Dark Echoes Survival. It was the night of December 30th, 2007. Far from Kenya's State House in Nairobi, flames lit up the sky over the Kibera slum. As the countries watched, an opposition marcher lifted a machete in front of a burning kiosk and shacks, a chilling image captured by Reuters and later featured by Human Rights Watch. Mere hours earlier, President Mwai Kibaki has been hastily sworn in after a disputed vote tally. As the news spread, enraged crowds look to the streets. In cities and towns across Kenya, the air fills with the crackles of gunfire and the stench of burning flesh. As long-simmering anger erupted into open revolts, many Kenyans felt their hard-won democracy have been stolen. By dawn, the country was in flames. In the years before that fateful night, hope had given way to frustration. In 2002, Kenya had swept away the old KANU regime and elected Kibaki on promises of a new deal, a new constitution, land reform, and a crackdown on corruption. Those promises soon unraveled. By 2006, analysts noted that nearly all hopes have evaporated, as key reforms stalled and Kibaki's ruling coalition splitted. Parliament passed hardly any significant laws and even granted itself pay raises, deepening public anger. Across the countryside, Kenyans grumbled that tribal favoritism and impunity has been entrenched rather than ended. By 2007, Kenya's political stage was sharply divided along ethnic lines. Kibaki, a Kikuyu, reigned under a new Party of National Unity, PNU coalition, which even absorbed his former rivals from KANU. Opposing him was Raila Odinga, a Luo, the charismatic leader of the Orange Democratic Movement, ODM, a broad opposition alliance born out of the 2005 anti-constitutional referendum campaign. ODM rallied Luos, Kiambaas, Kisiis, Kalenjins, and other supporters, while Kibaki's PNU drew mainly Kikuyu, Kamba, and Meru voters. Tribal fault lines were hard to ignore. Campaign's rhetoric grew vicious. ODM accused Kibaki of ruling for the Kikuyu alone, while PNU canvassers smeared Luo tradition, even deriding the Luo candidate as uncircumcised man who cannot lead Kenya. By election time, Kenya was saying goodbye to its image of stability. As Human Rights Watch noted, it was unsurprising that the ensuing showdown would take on an ethical cast. When voting day arrived on December 27, 2007, turnout was heavy and the polling itself was relatively calm. In the days that followed, preliminary results trickled out under intense scrutiny. By December 29th, it seemed Odinga was winning. With about half the votes counted, he led roughly 50% to 42%. His supporters celebrated and observers felt the election was largely well run so far. However, as delays mounted in the crucial central province counts, suspicions grew. Civil society groups complained that the Electoral Commission of Kenya, ECK, was stalling at a snail's pace, and both parties accused the other of tampering. By late afternoon on December 30th, ODM officials accused the ECK of forging results as the opposition tried to force a recount. Parliamentarians William Ruto, a Kalenjin ODM ally, openly protested that clear irregularities were occurring in the vote tallies. That evening, the report made international headlines. Against all expectations, the ECK announced Kibaki the winner. Official results credited Kibaki with 4,584,721 votes, 46.42% to Odinga's 4,352,993, 44.07%. The numbers stunned many. Observers noted that Odinga had led by about 1 million votes before the final hour's turnouts in the counts. 4 of the 7 ECK commissioners immediately protested the results as a sham, and the ECK chairman Samuel Kivuitu admitted he could not even say who had really won. In a dramatic move, the state-owned Kenya Broadcasting Corporation cut away from Kivuitu announcement when ODM members demanded proof. Yet within minutes, a television broadcast declared Kibaki president for a second term. Despite the chaos, Kibaki's inauguration proceeded without delay. That same night, he was quietly sworn in at the State House at about 6 p.m. in front of a stunned press corps. Opposition leaders were enraged. On live TV, Odinga called the results a shame and pleaded with Kibaki to concede, charging that the government was perpetrating a coup d'etat against the people. Supporters took to the streets within minutes. In Nairobi, Kibera slum, Reuters reporters found thousands of pro-opposition protesters burning houses and kiosks in furious reaction. Police fired tear gas and warning shots to try to disperse crowds. All over Kenya, in Kisumu, Eldoret, Nakuru, and on the coast, spontaneous rallies and riots flared up. By the end of December 30th, the country was in turmoil. As one foreign analyst grimly predicted, we are in for a period of violence and turbulence without doubts. The police response was swift and brutal. Under order to enforce midnight curfew, officers and paramilitary units opened fire on marchers with little provocation. Human Rights Watch later documented that in city slums, police often shot unarmed protesters, bystanders, and even children without warning. In Mombasa, local monitors counted 20 civilians gunned down by police in the first days of the unrest. In Kisumu, Odinga's stronghold, police were later accused of a shoot-to-kill policy during the protest. One young woman recalled seeing police spray bullets in the sky above a crowd chanting Odinga, just to intimidate them. By January 1st, Kenya media was filled with images of bodies and child homes. On New Year's Day, the horror peaked. In Kiambaa village near Eldoret, armed youths trapped scores of women and children inside a rural church and set it ablaze, killing more than 50 people. Let's put a pin on Kiambaa, we will come back to it. Kikuyu's retaliation against Luo and Kalenjin communities and police killing of protesters plunged the nation into ethnic warfare. One journalist described the scene: everywhere you look, there are burning houses, machete marks on the wall, terrified refugees on the road. Within weeks, the violence spun out of control. Ethnic militias organized under the cover of night. Human Rights Watch found that Kikuyu extremists, often labeled Mungiki or self-defense groups, were systematically burning Luo, Luya, and Kalenjin homes in towns like Naivasha, Nakuru, and Molo. Local Kikuyu businessmen even admitted paying young men to raise only Luo houses. Every person was given 100 or 200 shilling to participate. The toll was staggering. In a single Naivasha suburb, 41 people were reportedly killed in January 27 alone, 23 of them burned alive, including 13 children. By that point, Kenya's death toll had topped 1.5 million people were displaced. Entire villages were emptied as ethnic communities fled for safety. In despair, politicians on both sides pleaded for calm, while civil society groups warned that long-simmering land and tribal grievances were now bursting into open bloodshed. New Year's Eve 2007 in Kenya's Rift Valley was quiet, but fear smoldered in the air. The disputed election had fallen along tribal lines, and Kikuyu families in Uasin Gishu were bracing for violence. As one local texted, "Houses still burning, we are so scared." By dawn of January 1st, 2008, hundreds of Kikuyu women, children, and elders have fled their homes, huddled inside a small Kiambaa Assemblies of God church near Eldoret, praying for safety. Outside, a vast mob of young Kalenjin men, some with faces painted white, gathered with pangas, bow, and arrows. War songs and thunder rang as they surrounded the wooden building. Witnesses say they locked the main door with mattresses and piled bicycles against it. They poured fuel into the interior. Within minutes, the church turned into an oven engulfed in flames. Inside, terror descended. Mothers and children screamed and scrambled for the windows, but attackers awaited them below. Grace Githuthwa, one of the congregants, saw her own children crawl out of safety, but as she followed with her 3-year-old niece Miriam, a young man grabbed the screaming child and hurled her back into the inferno. Elsewhere, witnesses recalled seeing toddlers burned as their mothers leaped free. Anthony Mbuthia, then just 10, later testified that huge flames poured through the vents as everyone panicked and stampeded for the few exits. One survivor later appeared on the ICC tribunal, described attackers chanting and guarding every door. The blaze raged for over an hour. Outside, Kikuyu men who had tried to fight in vain were cut down with machetes. Finally, the flames died. The morning light revealed a scene of unimaginable horror. At least 30 to 35 people were killed. Most were women, children, or the elderly. Red Cross workers recovered dozens of charred bodies from the ruins. The mortuary in Eldoret received 35 corpses. Many were burned beyond recognition and several were infants. Tiny shoes and sandals lay scattered among the ashes. Survivors say they watched helplessly as young lives were snuffed out in the flames. Years later, Kiambaa survivors still live with the trauma. The church was rebuilt a few meters from the wreckage, but the old sanctuary remains a graveyard. A rusted fence now encloses simple wooden crosses marking 36 victims' graves. Visitors describe the scene like a horror movie, haunted by memories of that day. Each January 1st, some families gather at the new church to pray and remember, but justice has been elusive. Local trials ended in acquittals, and even the ICC cases linked to the violence were dropped amid witness intimidation. To the villagers of Kiambaa, the wound is as fresh as ever, a painful reminder of a night when a house of worship became a tomb. After the inferno at Kiambaa, the violence didn't end. It multiplied, spreading like a virus across the country. Town after town descended into chaos. In Kisumu, bodies lay in the streets as police opened fire on protesters. In Naivasha and Nakuru, retaliatory mobs wielded machetes and petrol bombs, touching homes and hunting those from the Luo and Luya communities. In the slums of Kibera and Mathare, neighbor turned against neighbor. Ethnic profiling, arson, rape, looting, and a cold-blooded execution defined those weeks. Eldoret town became an open-air battlefield. Dozens were hacked to death. In Nairobi, gangs patrolled estates with torches and panga blades, demanding ID cards to determine ethnicity and fate. Those who gave the wrong names were dragged out, mutilated, burned, or disappeared. Women were raped in front of their children. Entire villages were emptied as families fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs. But even more chilling than the mobs were the police bullets. Human rights reports state that in Kisumu, most people killed were unarmed and shot in the back, many of them children. In Nairobi, police were accused of letting revenge attacks unfold, or worse, taking part in them. It wasn't just a breakdown of law and order, it was a storm of pain fueled by politics, tribal manipulation, and raw vengeance. In Kisumu, majority Luo population rose in protest against Kibaki's win. Police used live bullets. According to KNCHR, most of the 115 deaths in Kisumu were from police gunfire. Victims included children and teens, many shot while fleeing. Major looting and arson in town center, several markets destroyed. Naivasha, Rift Valley. Retaliatory attacks by Bungiki and Kikuyu gangs against Luo, Luya, and Kalenjin. At least 41 people killed, many hacked with pangas or burned in homes and vehicles. Victims were hunted on highways and in hiding places. Police stood by in some areas or arrived too late. Nakuru, Rift Valley. Similar retaliatory violence by Kikuyu gang after Eldoret attacks. Over 112 people killed, dozens more injured. Churches and homes belonging to Luo and Kalenjin burned. Coordinated attacks suggested militia-like planning. Eldoret, Uasin Gishu. In addition to Kiambaa, Dozens were killed in rural and urban clashes. Ethnic cleansing began in December 2007 with Kikuyus forced out. Property worth millions looted or destroyed. Targeted killings, mob armed with bows, arrows and machetes. Kibera, Mathare, Huruma in Nairobi. Slums violence exploded. ID cards became death warrants. Mungiki gangs moved into Mathare and Huruma to defend Kikuyu territories. Luo and Luya's residents attacked or replaced. Homes set ablaze. Mass displacement. Nairobi police shot dozens during protests. Other regions were Kericho, Kisii, Kakamega, Molo, Limuru, all reported killings, sexual violence and arson. An estimated 1,133 people were killed nationally, over 600,000 people displaced. Widespread sexual violence, both by mobs and police, including gang rapes, rapes with objects, and assault of pregnant women.
By Prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo.
Good morning again.
Judge Ekaterina Trendafilova presided over the proceedings, and as serious as they were, a sense of humor laced some of the suspects' introductory notes, with both Sang and Ruto taking the earliest opportunity to pitch their defense.
An innocent person like me to be dragged all the way here, really, is a
In the smoldering ruins of Rift Valley villages, survivors recall a nightmarish winter of 2007-2008. Homes lay blackened by fire and charred bodies were carried from the fields. Over 1,100 people were killed, 100 more raped, and roughly 500,000 displaced in ethnic militia and even police units unleashed carefully coordinated attacks after a disputed election. This was not random mob violence. A Kenyan commission later found that while some killings erupted spontaneously, much of the bloodshed was organized by political actors. Even the police officers were implicated of the 1,113 confirmed deaths. Fully, 405 were shot by police, prompting the Waki Commission to urge deep security sectors reform. The Commission of Inquiry into Post-Election Violence, the Waki Commission named for its chair Philip Waki, laid bare these crimes in an October 2008 report. It catalogued the horror and called for accountability. The strongest suggestion was a special tribunal to try the top planners of the violence. Crucially, the Waki Commission even prepared a sealed envelope listing suspects bearing the greatest responsibility and handed it to the UN Chief Kofi Annan. The message was stuck. If Kenya failed to set up its own tribunal in 60 days, the envelope would go to The Hague. In other words, Kenyan leaders has to choose between prosecuting their patrons at home or delivering them to the international criminal courts. But Kenyan politics proved ruthless. A split emerged between those demanding justice and those pleading for forgiveness in the name of peace. Prime Minister Raila Odinga and reformers urged full implementation of working recommendations, partly to end the culture of impunity, partly to avoid ICC involvement. In contrast, President Mwai Kibaki and many Rift Valley politicians warned that indicting well-connected suspects would reopen ethnic wounds. Opponents openly argued that the country needed a chance for communities to come together and that trials would undermine reconciliation. Civil society and churches sided with accountability. The Catholic Church was particularly vocal, but in Parliament that push for a tribunal faltered. In January 2009, a constitutional amendment to create the special tribunal was voted down. MPs instead called it on the ICC to handle the cases. A second tribunal bill in mid-2009 failed on technicalities, and when a private member's bill was brought to the floor in November 2009, the moment simply fizzled out. The 60-day deadline quietly passed to the tribunal. By late 2009, Kenya had signed political accords pledging accountability. Even Kibaki and Odinga formally agreed not to shield anyone, but no concurrent prosecution followed. With domestic justice stalled, the stage fell to international justice. In May 2009, Kofi Annan turned over the Waki envelope to the ICC, and by March 2010, pre-trial judges in The Hague found that Kenya had made no real effort to try the suspects. On 15th December 2010, the ICC prosecutor finally announced 6 suspects. In one case, ODM leader William Ruto and Henry Kosgei plus radio host Joshua Sang. In the other figure in Kibaki's camp, Uhuru Kenyatta, the then Deputy Prime Minister. along with police boss Mohammed Hussein Ali and civil service chief Francis Muthaura. Kosgei and Ali would ultimately have their charges dropped in pre-trial hearings. The world suddenly saw that both sides of the old election divides were implicated at the top. Kenyatta and Ruto, erstwhile rivals, now grand coalition partners after the 2008 crisis, reacted politically. They each rallied for the ICC process in word, even ostentatiously supporting the call to let go to Hague, but maneuvered to scuttle in behind the scenes. In 2011, both men complied with ICC summons, but the Kenyan government simultaneously mounted a campaign to derail the court. As the coalition of the ICC notes, Kenyatta's government lobbied at the UN, African Union, and ICC Assembly to drop the cases, even pushing technical rule changes to benefit sitting officials. Human Rights Watch later observed that President Kenyatta's administration actively courted other African leaders to undermine the ICC, failing even to protect witnesses and activists who supported justice. The ICC trial nonetheless limped forward. In March 2011, judges issued summons and later that year held confirmation hearings. On 23 January 2012, charges were confirmed against Kenyatta, Ruto, Sang and Muthaura, meaning there was enough evidence to proceed. Kosgei and Ali were not confirmed, but as the trial approached, an insidious campaign of witness intimidation exploded. Prosecutors in The Hague described an unprecedented level of interference. Dozens of witnesses who had given damning testimony suddenly withdrew or recanted under threats and bribery. In one dramatic turn, the trial chamber even admitted evidence from witnesses who had been tampered with, only to have the appeals chamber throw it out in fairness grounds. One Ruto defense witness was brutally murdered in 2015, a crime never fully explained. By spring 2016, the trial of Ruto and Sang collapsed for lack of evidence, with judges noting the case had been seriously tainted by the witness campaign. The ICC expressly left open the possibility of reopening it if new evidence emerged. Earlier in March 2013, prosecutor Fatou Bensouda had withdrawn charges against Muthaura, and in December 2014, she dropped Kenyatta's charges as well. By early 2016, the ICC courthouses were shuttered, no conviction, just closed cases. Back in Kenya, the story was just as grim. The post-election violence has led the creation of an international crime division in the High Court, announced in late 2012, and new Rome statutes laws in 2009, but in practice only a trickle of prosecutions ever proceeded. A 2012 review by Kenya's Director of Public Prosecution found scant evidence in roughly 5,000 case files. At best, a few low-level perpetrators were convicted, 3 murders, and dozens of rape cases by 2013, while police officers and powerful leaders continued to walk free. For many victims, every court appeared closed. Those who tried to report crimes often faced skepticism or even hostility from police. One man's plea about a daughter killed by police was met with, "The police don't kill people." The silence from Kenya's court deepened public despair. "Justice delayed is justice denied," warned Amnesty International, quoting victims worried by 20 arrests and no trial. Survivors felt cheated. "I know who raped our children," one father told Amnesty, but nobody acted. A local Kalenjin elder put it bluntly, "We turn pebbles. Small stones are turned. The big ones, no one dares." Even as the 1,000 participated in ICC proceedings as victims, many admitted the charges at The Hague did not address the worst abuses they endured. For them, the ICC had become a distant spectacle, better than nothing, some felt, but still far from true justice.